I think this is a really interesting point, is that I think that a lot of the women I have worked with over the years have been very effective at building their contacts. So building their contacts and maintaining their contacts, checking in with them, kind of doing follow-up stories with them, and often have the kind of interview manner which encourages some people to open up. Maybe it's about approach, it's about being not as, I don't want to use the word aggressive because that's a very gendered loaded term, but having an approach, a personable approach that would open people up. And in the industry, for example, there is this thing called the death knock, which is an awful phrase, but basically what it is when somebody has passed away in tragic circumstances, a journalist will go and knock the door of their family to ask them to talk about it. And in most newspapers, they would often send a woman to do that job, because knocking on the door, people may be more likely to open up to a woman. And often, maybe even, this is going to sound terrible, but they would send the youngest woman in the newsroom, because you're more likely to open up and let in a young woman than an older woman. I've certainly heard news editors say that before. We have very interesting kind of examples of this, and one case from my own professional career that has always stuck in my mind was the case of Madeleine McCann and why she became so popular in the news agenda. And one of the reasons why was Madeleine was a very beautiful little girl, and she was also from a very affluent background. Her parents were doctors, she was very middle class. There was lots of lovely pictures of her that you could only get, were only associated with the fact that she was from a financially secure background. And shortly after the Madeleine case, there was another instance where a little girl went missing in this country called Shannon Matthews, which became a famous case because ultimately her mother was proven to be involved in her disappearance and Shannon was found. And it's a very famous case because of that. But at the time working on it, it was initially very difficult to get news editors to really be interested in this story. And the reason that they weren't as interested is Shannon wasn't as photogenic in their mind as Madeleine was. And she also was from a very, very poor background, from a really struggling economic background. And so she just simply wasn't as valuable to them. They didn't think people would feel the same. They didn't care as much about this girl from a working class council estate in Sunderland. It's not in Sunderland. That's where I'm from. So I just read, they didn't care as much for this girl from a working class estate in Dewsbury as they cared about Madeleine, who was from an affluent middle class family. And that's a tragedy, and that's a travesty actually of our society in this country, that we value even missing children and even victims of crime more based on their looks or based on their class, that women are always judged through these lenses.